Life now is very different than, let's say, what life was like in 1910. 100 years ago, thousands of people are homeless and the fire wiped out block after block as the city turned to nearly ashes. April 23rd, 1910, was a day of great destruction, a freak accident. This fire was the Great Fire of 1910.
It was a hot April day. The spring had been fairly dry in southwest Louisiana in 1910. The temperatures had been warm, and but on that particular day, it started out as pretty much any day. Well, the story goes that the fire was started in the back of the old Williams Opera House, which is a disused vaudeville theater on Ryan Street. Stagehands were burning trash, and the fire got out of hand, is how the story goes. Now, if that's the complete and whole story, that's probably the truth. But the fire started on that fateful day in 1910 in April.
The fire in the end burned 109 buildings, and that's stores, churches, municipal buildings, people's houses. Everything in the path of the fire that was wooden burned up. So it really devastated the town.
The story goes that the Majestic Hotel, which had just been completed a few years earlier and it had its own water system, used its own water system to keep its neighbors well watered so that they wouldn't catch fire, so that the Majestic wouldn't catch fire. And some of that is why we can see a few of the buildings downtown that predate the 1910 fire. The building that is now Puget Street Cafe and that block of buildings on Puget Street predate the fire because the Majestic kept them well watered. The sheriff used inmates to help fight the fire. They beat the fire with wet quilts and gunny sacks and whatnot. And then at the end of the fire, because the jail had burned down, the inmates were taken to his own home and trooped up 3 flights of stairs to the attic of the Reed homestead, where they stayed for almost a year until another jail was constructed.
And there is one story of some of the people who lived in the Catholic church complex of a church and a convent and a school and everything. They took their belongings out into the woods, into nearby woods, but the fire burned up the woods too, so it didn't really help anything. So people were just desperate, trying to do whatever they could.
There are some stories where the fire came and burned the structures, the property was on the street as well as the house. Others were able to use wagons and trolleys to get some of their belongings out of the harm's way. Various families have various stories on how they dealt with the fire. One unfortunate family took their grand piano out of the house, struggled to get it out of the house to save it because it was a very new grand piano. And unfortunately the fire burned the grand piano, and I think it saved the house. I think the house was saved, so it was kind of an unusual story. But a lot of these stories are going to be told at various events that commemorate the Great Fire as we go through.
There were, in the days following the fire, it was really interesting. If you look at the newspapers, there are classified ads that have notices of, you know, I threw my belongings out onto the lawn and now I can't find them. Does anybody know where they are? And some of them get really specific. They say, you know, this young man came by with a wagon and I put all my belongings in his wagon and I haven't seen him since. So if you know where he is, can I have my things back? That sort of thing. So I think the whole city was pretty much thrown into chaos because so much was damaged and nobody knew where anything was. The city hall had burned down, the courthouse had burned down. You didn't know where to go for your court hearing or to see a lawyer or anything like that. So it was pretty chaotic for a few weeks there.
Gunn, a Mr. Gunn, I can't recall his name now, who was the fire chief, was fired after the Great Fire because he had failed, in the city father's opinion, he had failed to be prepared for such a thing. Here's a photograph of some of the city immediately after the fire. We are actually standing in the middle of Kirby Street looking west towards the lake, and we see here the 1903 courthouse, which burned to the ground. The 1903 courthouse was constructed to the west of the 1880s courthouse, so we had sort of double courthouses in Lake Charles. Both of them burned in the 1910 fire. Just to the northeast was the Catholic Church, which was right on the corner of Ryan and Kirby, and we can see the hulk of the church here and some of the chimneys from the rectory and the Catholic school, which were also located on that block.
So a lot of important documents were lost. The courthouse records burned. There is one story that John McNeese, that McNeese State University is named after. At that time, he was the superintendent of education, but he was out of town. And so his wife went to his offices in the courthouse and started throwing out the school board records out onto the lawn in an effort to save them. And she did save quite a few records, but all of the tax rolls and that sort of thing were burned in the fire.
Well, there are some who say that Lake Charles really hasn't even completed rebuilding, but the last major construction for the fire was the completion of the Catholic Church, which was as late as 1916. The courthouse and the city hall were both finished relatively quickly and early. They used the same architect, and they were built to serve an immediate need. But recovery took, 3 to 5 years complete.
Well, Lake Charles, before the fire, other people had said that maybe our fire ratings weren't quite up to what they needed to be, and our fire controls weren't as good as they should have been. So we definitely changed a lot of policies then. We had better fire equipment and better procedures to handle fires. And we also started building important buildings out of more stable materials like bricks and stone.
I would expect that the biggest benefit that Lake Charles had was that Lake Charles became a modern city. The 1910 fire encouraged the city to grow. It provided a resolve to grow smartly, to build buildings of fireproof materials. There was an interesting relationship developed because of the Great Fire between Lake Charles and the New Orleans architectural firm of Favreau-Livaudais. Favreau-Livaudais was an architectural firm in New Orleans that sort of served as the, if you will, the kind of the trophy architects. If you were successful, you had a building by Favreau and Livaudais. They were designers of that caliber. And Favreau and Livaudais came to Lake Charles and designed the courthouse, the 1911 City Hall, which we use as an arts and cultural center now, the cathedral, but they also had other commissions. They designed Central School and the ward schools. They designed the pavilion at Locke Park, and they designed several private residences in Lake Charles. And they gave a kind of a sophisticated architectural viewpoint, a more worldly viewpoint. So not only did we have safer buildings because they were fireproofed, we all are as fireproofed as you could have given the technology of the day, but we also had a better appreciation for the entire sense of architecture and sense of place. The buildings were not generic buildings. They were buildings that were designed for a particular purpose, designed for a particular climate, and designed to be safe. And that was an advantage. That is the modern way of doing things. And so we ended up with a city that took itself more seriously as a city.